Today we're going to be working on transformations again. So you'll need a paper and you'll need 3 colored pencils or markers, whatever, I don't really care. All right, if you look at the top of this. It says fill out the tables for y equals x squared and then y equals negative x squared. So whenever you plug these numbers in, you need to use parentheses. So the first one, we're going to plug in -2 in here. So parenthesis -2 squared is 4. And then parenthesis -1 squared is 1. What's going to happen when we square 0? 0. What's going to happen when we square 1? 1 and 2 is 4. Now over here, you're going to do negative parenthesis -2 squared. So we're going to square the -2, and then we're going to change its sign, which gives me -4. And then negative parenthesis -1 squared, which is -1. 0 is just going to give me 0. So negative parenthesis 1 squared, -1. And then negative or positive 2 squared would give me -4. So when you graph these, the first one's going to look like this, and the second one's going to look like that. So go ahead and graph that to the right. And then the question below asks, for the function f of x equals a of x, so a is the number in front of the x squared, describe how the sign of a changes the graph. What happens when the number in front is positive? What does the graph look like? And what do you mean by positive? It opens up. So if a is positive, the graph opens up. So write that down. If a is positive, then the graph opens up. Yeah, this is the answer to this question. Okay, and then the other half of that is, what if a is negative? It opens down. So if a is negative, then the graph opens down. Okay? All right. Go over here, you have 3 different graphs to do. So we already know the answers to the first one. 4, 1, 0, 1, and 4. We've already graphed that. So over here, parenthesis, -2 parenthesis squared plus 2 is 6. Okay? And then you're going to do the same thing for -1, 0, 1, and 2. And then you're going to do the same thing over here. And then you'll answer the question, what happens when you add or subtract numbers? So I want you to write, when k is positive, the graph moves however it moves. When k is negative, the graph moves however it moves. Does that make sense? Well, no, it's, so if you take x squared and you add something on the outside, how does the graph move? We already know, how does the graph move when you add to the outside? It moves up. What if you subtract from the outside? It's going to move down. Nope, multiplying will make it wider and thinner. Taller and shorter yet. So this moves it up or down. Okay? Then you'll do the same thing underneath. So for number 3, we already know the first set. It's right there. 4, 1, 0, 1, 4. So how am I going to plug 0 in here? So parenthesis 0 minus 2 parenthesis squared, which gives me 4. And then parenthesis 1 minus 2 parenthesis squared, and so on. Okay? And then on this question, describe what happens when you add on the inside. What does happen when you add on the inside? So adding to the x goes left, and subtracting from the x goes right. Okay? And then on the back, at the top, once again, we already know the first set, 4, 1, 0, 1, 4. That's the same as all the other equations. How do you do 2x squared in your calculator? 2 parenthesis negative 2 parenthesis squared. Yeah, this is the first set on the back. So that would be 8. And then you describe what happens when you multiply and what happens when you divide or multiply by a fraction. Okay, and then you have a couple questions to answer. When it says vertex, when you draw a parabola, the lowest point or the highest point is the vertex, depending on which way it opens. So if it asks you where the vertex is, it just wants to know how far left and how far up, or right and down, or just wants to know where the middle of the graph is. Okay? And then on the very last one, it didn't give you x values, but I want you to start 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the x's you want to use on that last graph. Okay? Each time you graph it, use a different color so you can distinguish between the two graphs or the three graphs. Any questions? Justin has a few too many colors. Okay, good luck.